My son-in-law hissed in my face, "You're under house arrest until you crawl to me on your knees and beg for forgiveness." I just smiled calmly and said, "All right." The next morning his face turned ghostly pale when my lawyer burst in. "You've been cut from the will. $90 million gone." He dropped to his knees and started begging. Before continuing, subscribe to the channel and write in the comments what time it is in your region right now. My name is Harold Coleman. I'm 68 years old, living in Scottsdale, Arizona. Spent 40 years running my own architectural firm before I sold it and retired. I've always been the kind of man who plans ahead, who sees the blueprint before the building exists. Funny how that skill didn't help me see what was happening in my own home. Let me tell you about my daughter Rachel and her husband Jason Prescott. They moved into my house 3 years ago, right after my retirement. The house is a Spanish colonial-style mansion on East Mockingbird Lane, 5 bedrooms, 4,200 square feet. I bought it decades ago, watched its value climb to nearly $3 million. But that's just the house. My total assets, built over a lifetime of work, sit around $90 million. Real estate investments, stocks, the money from selling Coleman and Associates. I'm not saying this to brag. I'm saying this because it matters to what happened next. Jason wasn't always the man I know today. When Rachel first brought him home, he was charming, handsome, well-spoken, full of big ideas. He called me "sir" and shook my hand firmly. He looked me in the eye when he talked. I remember thinking, my daughter found herself a good one. 3 failed startups later, the charm wore thin like cheap paint. It started small. A comment here, a smirk there. Jason began treating my home like his personal kingdom, and me like some tenant who'd overstayed his welcome. He'd change the thermostat without asking, rearrange furniture I'd had for 30 years, invite his friends over and introduce me as Rachel's father with a dismissive wave, like I was some piece of furniture that came with the property. Rachel changed, too. She used to call me every day when she lived across town. Now she lives under my roof, and I'm lucky if she looks up from her phone during dinner. Jason isolated her, slowly, methodically. Every time I tried to talk to her alone, he'd appear like a shadow. Every suggestion I made, he'd counter. Every memory I shared, he'd redirect the conversation. But I kept quiet. I told myself it was just adjustment, just growing pains. Family is family, right? The dinner party changed everything. It was a Saturday evening. Jason had invited some of his business contacts, people he was trying to impress for his next revolutionary venture. I'd spent the afternoon helping set up, despite Jason's assurances that I should just rest, old-timer. I even opened a bottle from my wine collection, a 2005 Chateau Margaux I'd been saving. There were 8 of us around the table. The conversation flowed, mostly Jason talking about his grand plans. I stayed quiet, sipping my wine, observing. That's when one of the guests, a woman in her 40s with too much jewelry, asked about the house. "It's absolutely stunning," she said. "Have you lived here long?" Before I could answer, Jason cut in with a laugh that scraped against my nerves like sandpaper. "Oh, Harold here is our resident museum piece," he said, gesturing at me with his wine glass. "Comes with the property. Original fixtures, you might say." The table erupted in laughter, all except Rachel, who stared at her plate. And me, who felt something cold settle in my chest. I smiled. 40 years of negotiations taught me to never show your cards. "Museum pieces tend to be quite valuable," I said calmly. "And irreplaceable." Jason's smile flickered for just a moment. Then he laughed it off and changed the subject. That night, I couldn't sleep. I went downstairs around midnight to make some tea. My old knees don't appreciate the Arizona tile floors anymore, but the walk helps me think. I was passing Jason's home office, the room that used to be my study, when I heard his voice through the crack in the door. "Yes, I understand the process," he was saying into his phone. "Conservatorship, guardianship, whatever you call it. I need to know how fast we can move." I stopped, pressed myself against the wall. My heart, which usually beats steady as a metronome, started racing. "The old man is clearly losing it," Jason continued, forgetful, confused. "I've got Rachel on board. She'll testify if needed. Just tell me what documentation we need." A pause, then a laugh that made my blood run cold. "Once I have control of his assets, we can liquidate the real estate portfolio first. That's probably 30, 40 million right there. Then we move on to the investment accounts. I didn't hear the rest. I walked back to my room on silent feet, my tea forgotten. I sat on the edge of my bed in the darkness, staring at the wall. 68 years old. Worked my whole life. Built something from nothing. And now my own son-in-law was planning to have me declared incompetent to steal everything I'd earned. I thought about Rachel, my little girl who used to run to me after nightmares, who now couldn't even meet my eyes at dinner. I thought about Jason's smug face, his casual cruelty, his absolute certainty that he was the smartest person in any room. And somewhere in that darkness, something shifted inside me. The architect in me started seeing a different kind of blueprint. Jason thought he was dealing with a confused old man. He was about to learn how wrong he was. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat in my leather armchair by the window, watching the Arizona sky turn from black to deep blue to orange. My mind worked like it hadn't in years, examining angles, discarding weak solutions. By the time the sun cleared the McDowell Mountains, I had the beginning of a plan. I remembered a morning 15 years ago when Rachel was 21. She'd just graduated from Arizona State. I took her to breakfast at our favorite diner, and she talked for 2 hours about her dreams. Teaching, travel, maybe writing a book. "Dad," she'd said, squeezing my hand, "I hope I can be half as successful as you. But more than that, I hope I can be half as kind." That girl was gone now. Buried under 3 years of Jason's manipulation, I couldn't count on her. Not yet. I found Jason in the kitchen around 9, drinking his protein shake and scrolling through his phone. Rachel was nowhere to be seen. "Jason," I said, keeping my voice neutral, "we need to talk." He looked up with that practiced smile. "Sure thing, Harold. What's on your mind?" "I heard your phone call last night." The smile didn't waver, but something shifted behind his eyes. A calculation, an adjustment. "Phone call?" he said innocently. "The one about conservatorship, about having me declared incompetent, about liquidating my assets." For a long moment, Jason just stared at me. Then slowly, he set down his phone. The mask fell away like a snake shedding its skin. "Well," he said, "I suppose we're done pretending." He stood up, and I noticed for the first time how he positioned himself, blocking the doorway, making himself bigger. A dominance display like something from a nature documentary. "Here's the thing, Harold," he continued, his voice dropping to something colder. "You're getting old. You're confused. You need someone to look after your interests. And since Rachel is your only living relative, that responsibility falls to us." "I'm not confused," I said, "and I don't need anyone to look after anything." Jason laughed. It was a different laugh than the one he used at dinner parties. Harder, sharper. "See, that's exactly what someone in cognitive decline would say. Don't worry, we'll make sure you're comfortable. You'll still live here. You'll still have your books and your little clock collection, but the financial decisions," he spread his hands, "those will be handled by people who know what they're doing." Jason had no patience, no precision. He saw only the end result he wanted and assumed he could bully his way there. "Where's Rachel?" I asked. "Rachel agrees with me," Jason said flatly. "She's worried about you, Harold. We both are." "I'd like to hear that from her. She's resting. The stress of your condition has been hard on her." My condition. 3 words that told me everything I needed to know about how far this had already gone. "So what happens now?" I asked, genuinely curious how he'd play this. Jason walked toward me, stopping close enough that I could smell his cologne. Something expensive. Probably bought with money from my daughter's credit card. My credit card, ultimately. "Here's what's going to happen," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "You're going to stay in your room. You're going to stop making trouble. And when the lawyers come with the paperwork, you're going to sign it without a fuss." He reached into his pocket and pulled out my car keys. The keys to my Lexus. The car I'd bought myself for my 65th birthday. "Wouldn't want you getting lost," he said with a smirk. "And if I refuse?" Jason's face transformed into something ugly. The charming mask was completely gone now, replaced by something predatory. "You're under house arrest, old man," he hissed, leaning close to my face. "You're not leaving your room until you crawl to me on your knees and beg for forgiveness for disrespecting me in my own home. You hear me? Crawl and beg." I looked at him. really looked at him. This man who'd married my daughter, who lived in my house, who ate food bought with my money, who slept on sheets I'd paid for, who thought he could intimidate me with his posturing and his threats. And I smiled. "All right," I said quietly. Jason blinked. Whatever he'd expected, it wasn't this. "What?" I said, "All right. I'll stay in my room. I'll behave. You win." His eyes narrowed, searching my face for the trick, but I kept my expression mild, almost submissive. 40 years of business negotiations. 40 years of reading people, of knowing when to push and when to pull back. 40 years of playing the long game. "Good," Jason said finally, though he still looked uncertain. "I'm glad we understand each other." He stepped aside, and I walked toward the stairs. Slowly, like the feeble old man he thought I was. But inside, my mind was racing. The blueprint was taking shape. Every room, every corridor, every load-bearing wall. I saw the finished structure now, elegant and devastating. Jason thought he'd won. He thought his little speech had broken me. He had no idea that he'd just handed me exactly what I needed. Time. Time to make phone calls he wouldn't know about. Time to contact professionals who specialized in exactly this kind of situation. Time to set pieces on a board that Jason didn't even know existed. I reached my room and closed the door softly behind me. Then I walked to my desk, where my second phone sat in a locked drawer. The one I used only for important matters. The one Jason had never seen. I dialed a number I'd looked up weeks ago, back when I first started noticing Jason's behavior changing, back when I first began to suspect. "Webb and Sterling," a professional voice answered. "Marcus Webb, please," I said. "Tell him it's Harold Coleman. Tell him it's urgent." Through my window, I could see Jason's car pulling out of the driveway, off to meet with his lawyers, no doubt, planning his victory. He had no idea the war had just begun. 48 hours. That's how long I stayed in my room, playing the part of the broken old man. 48 hours of watching Jason strut around my house like he'd already won. 48 hours of Rachel avoiding my eyes whenever she brought me meals on a tray, like I was some invalid who couldn't be trusted with a fork. But those 48 hours weren't wasted. Far from it. Marcus Webb had been efficient. We'd met secretly the day before at his office on East Camelback Road, while Jason thought I was napping. A taxi from 2 blocks away, cash payment, no digital trail. Webb was a sharp man in his early 50s, the kind of lawyer who listened more than he talked and charged accordingly. When I explained my situation, he didn't flinch. He'd seen it before, he said. Elder financial abuse was more common than people realized. "The good news," he told me, "is that Arizona law is on your side. You're clearly competent. Any doctor would confirm that. And your assets are substantial enough to make this worth doing properly." "What do you recommend?" "An irrevocable trust. Move everything into it now, before your son-in-law can file his conservatorship petition. Once the assets are in the trust, they're protected. He can't touch them, even if he somehow convinces a judge you're incompetent." I signed the paperwork that afternoon. New will, trust documents, everything. Catherine Morgan, a meticulous notary Webb worked with, witnessed every signature. Video recorded the whole process, too. Webb's idea in case anyone later claimed I'd been confused or coerced. Now I was waiting for the final piece. The doorbell rang at 9 in the morning. I was in my room, door cracked open, watching. Jason practically sprinted to the door. He'd been expecting his own lawyer, the one filing the conservatorship papers. I could see the anticipation in his shoulders, the barely contained excitement in his step. He opened the door to find Marcus Webb standing on the porch, briefcase in hand. "Can I help you?" Jason asked, his smile faltering. "Mr. Prescott?" Webb's voice carried up the stairs, clear and professional. "I'm Marcus Webb, attorney at law. I represent Mr. Harold Coleman." The silence that followed was delicious. I watched Jason's posture change, watched the confusion ripple across his face. Harold has a lawyer." "Indeed he does. May I come in?" "I have some documents Mr. Coleman asked me to deliver personally." Jason stepped aside, still processing. Rachel appeared from the kitchen, drawn by the voices. I made my way downstairs, taking my time, each step deliberate, each breath calm. They were all in the living room when I arrived. Jason stood by the fireplace, arms crossed. Rachel perched on the edge of the sofa. Webb waited patiently, briefcase unopened. "Ah, Harold," Jason said, recovering his composure. "I see you've hired yourself a lawyer. A bit late for that, don't you think?" I said nothing, just nodded at Webb. The attorney opened his briefcase and withdrew a manila folder. "Mr. Prescott, Mrs. Prescott, I'm here to inform you of several changes to Mr. Coleman's estate planning." "Estate planning?" Jason laughed. "The old man doesn't need estate planning. He needs a caretaker." Webb ignored him. "As of yesterday afternoon, Mr. Harold Coleman has executed a new last will and testament. He has also transferred all of his assets, totaling approximately $90 million, into an irrevocable living trust." The color drained from Jason's face so fast I thought he might faint. "What?" "Furthermore," Webb continued, his tone never wavering, "both you and Mrs. Prescott have been removed as beneficiaries. The estate will now pass to charitable organizations of Mr. Coleman's, choosing upon his death." Rachel's hand flew to her mouth. Jason just stood there, mouth opening and closing like a fish pulled from water. You can't do that," Jason stammered. "He's not competent. He can't make these decisions." Webb pulled out another document. "I have here a signed statement from Dr. Patricia Reeves, a licensed geriatric psychiatrist, confirming that Mr. Coleman is fully competent and capable of managing his own affairs. The evaluation was conducted 2 days ago." Jason's eyes darted to me. Gone was the smug superiority. Gone was the predator's confidence. In its place was something I'd never seen on his face before. Fear. "Harold," he started. "Don't," I said quietly. "Harold, please, let's talk about this. I'm sure we can work something out. This is all just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding?" I let the words hang in the air. "You planned to have me declared incompetent, to steal my life's work, to lock me in my own room until I crawled to you and begged for forgiveness. I didn't mean... I was just..." And then it happened. Jason Prescott, the man who'd spent 3 years treating me like dirt beneath his expensive shoes, dropped to his knees. "Please, Harold, please, I'm sorry. I was wrong. I'll do anything. Just, please don't do this." I looked down at him, this man who'd demanded I crawl, who'd called me a museum piece, who'd tried to steal everything I'd built. "Interesting," I said calmly. "I thought I was the one who was supposed to be on his knees." Rachel started crying. Jason kept begging, his words tumbling over each other in a desperate flood. I turned to Webb. "I believe we're done here." "Yes, Mr. Coleman." The lawyer closed his briefcase. "I'll be in touch about the remaining matters." He left without another word. I followed him to the door, then paused at the threshold of the living room. Jason was still on his knees, and Rachel sat frozen on the couch. "You have until the end of the month to find new living arrangements," I said. "I suggest you start looking." Then I walked back upstairs, closed my door, and allowed myself a small smile. The first phase was complete. But I knew Jason well enough to know this wasn't over. The begging lasted 3 days. Jason tried everything. Apologies, excuses, promises of change. He even tried tears, though they looked as genuine as a $3 bill. Rachel stayed mostly silent, caught between her husband and her father, unable to choose. I maintained my position, polite but immovable. By the 4th day, the tone changed. I was in my study, the one I'd reclaimed now that the power dynamic had shifted, when I heard Jason on the phone. His voice had that particular edge it got when he was scheming. "Brandon, I need you to look into this. There has to be a way to challenge the trust. Undue influence, mental incapacity, something." A pause. "I don't care how much it costs. We're talking about $90 million. Find a way." I set down my book and listened more closely. "What about his medical records? Can we subpoena those? There must be something, some diagnosis, some medication that would suggest he wasn't thinking clearly." Another pause. "Fine. Do what you have to do. But I want options on my desk by next week." The call ended. I heard footsteps, then Jason's shadow, past my door without stopping. So, he was bringing in reinforcements. Brandon Steele, I assumed, a lawyer who specialized in contesting wills and trusts. I'd heard of him. Aggressive, expensive, not overly concerned with ethics. This was expected. A man like Jason didn't accept defeat. He regrouped and counterattacked. But I had anticipated this. The architect's curse. Always thinking 3 moves ahead. The next morning, I made a call of my own. Dennis Hawkins answered on the second ring. I'd found him through Webb's recommendation, a private investigator who specialized in financial fraud cases. 48 years old, former forensic accountant, built like someone who spent his free time in a boxing gym. "Mr. Coleman," he said, "what can I do for you? I need you to dig deeper into my son-in-law's finances, business dealings, debts, anything that might be relevant. The preliminary work I did was just surface level. You want the full picture? Everything. Don't leave any stone unturned. That'll take about 2 weeks and cost around $15,000. Money isn't the concern. Accuracy is. Understood. I'll be in touch." Over the following days, I watched Jason carefully. He was busy, constantly on his phone, meeting with people I didn't recognize. Rachel seemed increasingly anxious, jumping at small noises, avoiding both of us. Jason had also started being excessively nice, bringing me coffee in the morning, asking about my day, offering to drive me to doctor's appointments, transparent as glass. He was building a narrative, creating witnesses who could testify that poor old Harold was being unreasonable, that Jason was just a concerned son-in-law trying to help. I played along, accepting his coffee with a polite nod, declining his offers with gentle excuses. Let him think his performance was working. Meanwhile, Hawkins was digging. The first report came a week later. We met at a small cafe called Desert Bloom, far from my neighborhood. Hawkins slid a folder across the table, his face carefully neutral. "Your son-in-law has been busy," he said. I opened the folder. Financial statements, email printouts, transaction records. He owes $340,000 to investors from his last startup, Hawkins explained. The company folded 8 months ago, but he's been telling them he'll pay them back with family money. They're getting impatient. I flipped to the next page. My stomach tightened. He's also been in contact with a real estate company called Sedona Developments. According to these emails, he's been discussing selling your house. My house? Yes, sir. Started about 5 months ago. He's been representing himself as having power of attorney over your affairs. Hasn't signed anything yet, but they've discussed terms. A quick sale at below market value in exchange for a fast closing. I stared at the documents. My house. The home I'd built. He'd been trying to sell it out from under me. "There's more," Hawkins said. "The really interesting part." He pointed to a document near the bottom of the stack. A copy of a check. My signature at the bottom, authorizing a transfer of $50,000 to an account I'd never heard of. "I didn't sign this," I said. "I know. I had a handwriting expert look at it. It's a forgery. A good one, but definitely not your signature." I sat back in my chair. The cafe bustled around us. Normal people living normal lives. And here I was, looking at proof that my son-in-law had committed multiple felonies. "Forgery is a Class 4 felony in Arizona," Hawkins said, "up to 3.5 years in prison." "How many documents like this are there?" "3 that I've found so far, totaling about $120,000. I closed the folder. My hands were steady. My mind was clear. Jason thought he was fighting for $90 million. He didn't realize he was now fighting to stay out of prison. "Keep digging," I told Hawkins. "I want everything." "Yes, sir." I drove home slowly, the folder sitting on the passenger seat beside me. The Arizona sun beat down on the windshield, harsh and unforgiving. Jason was in the living room when I returned, watching television with the casual arrogance of a man who thought he owned the place. He looked up and smiled that plastic smile. "Harold, you were out early. Everything okay?" "Fine," I said. "Just needed some fresh air." "That's great. Say, Rachel and I were thinking we could all have dinner together tonight. Clear the air. Start fresh." "That sounds nice," I lied. I walked past him up to my room and locked the door behind me. Then I sat at my desk and started planning the next phase. Jason had brought lawyers to fight for money. He didn't know I was holding a weapon that could destroy him completely. The question now was when to use it. 2 weeks passed. 2 weeks of watching Jason perform his little act, bringing me coffee, asking about my health, playing the devoted son-in-law for anyone who might be watching. 2 weeks of Rachel drifting through the house like a ghost, unable to meet my eyes. and 2 weeks of Hawkins digging deeper into the cesspool of Jason's financial life. We met again at Desert Bloom on a Tuesday morning. The cafe was nearly empty, just a few retirees reading newspapers, and a young woman working on her laptop. Hawkins arrived with a thicker folder this time, his expression grimmer than before. "It's worse than I thought," he said without preamble. "Much worse." He spread the documents across the table. Bank statements, email chains, copies of legal documents. "Let's start with the debt," Hawkins said. "The $340,000 he owes investors? That's just the tip. He's also got $60,000 in credit card debt, all under your daughter's name, and another $25,000 owed to a private lender, the kind who charges interest rates that should be illegal." I did the math. $425,000 in debt, for a man who hadn't held a real job in years. Where did all this money go? Failed investments, mostly. He fancied himself a day trader for a while. Lost about $100,000 in 3 months. The rest went to lifestyle, keeping up appearances, expensive dinners, designer clothes, a watch collection worth $50,000. I thought about the Rolex Jason wore so proudly, probably bought with money he'd stolen from me. What about the house sale? Hawkins pulled out a sheaf of emails. Sedona Developments has been very interested. Jason told them he'd have power of attorney within a month, that it was just a matter of getting the paperwork in order. They offered $2.1 million for a quick sale. No inspections. Cash closing. $2.1 million for a house worth $2.8. He was willing to leave $700,000 on the table just to get the money faster. He was planning to take the cash and disappear, I said, realizing the full scope of his plan. That's my assessment, yes. Pay off his most dangerous creditors, pocket the rest, and vanish before anyone figured out what happened. And Rachel? Hawkins hesitated. Difficult to say. The emails suggest he was planning to bring her along, at least initially, but there are also references to accounts she doesn't seem to know about. Hidden money, an escape route she wasn't part of. My daughter, married to a man who was planning to abandon her the moment she was no longer useful. Now for the forgeries, Hawkins continued, I found 4 more. Total of 7 documents, authorizing transfers totaling $173,000, all to accounts Jason controls directly. 7 forged signatures, $173,000 stolen dollars. In Arizona, each forgery was a separate felony charge. There's one more thing, Hawkins said. He pulled out a final document, a photograph of what looked like an official form. This is a draft conservatorship petition. Jason's lawyer prepared it before you made your move. It claims you suffer from early-stage dementia, that you've been making irrational financial decisions, and that you need someone to manage your affairs. I read through the document. The lies were so casual, so confident. Harold Coleman exhibits confusion about basic financial matters. Harold Coleman has been observed forgetting recent conversations. Harold Coleman has shown signs of paranoid ideation. This was never filed, Hawkins said. Your preemptive action stopped it. But if you'd waited even a few more days... I didn't need him to finish the sentence. If I'd waited, Jason would have filed this petition. A court hearing would have been scheduled. And while the legal process ground on, Jason would have had time to steal even more. Maybe even convince a sympathetic judge that poor, confused Harold really did need a caretaker. You've done excellent work, I told Hawkins. What do I owe you? $18,000, all in. I can provide detailed invoices if you need them. Send them to my lawyer, Marcus Webb. Will do. Hawkins gathered the documents and slid them into a large envelope, which he handed to me. Mr. Coleman, if you don't mind me saying, you're handling this remarkably well. Most people in your situation would be falling apart. I took the envelope. I spent my career building structures that could withstand earthquakes. A man like Jason isn't even a tremor. I drove home with the envelope locked in my trunk, my mind already racing ahead to the next phase. I had the evidence now. Enough to destroy Jason completely. Enough to send him to prison. The question was how to use it. Rush in too fast and he might flee before justice caught up with him. Wait too long and he might find another way to wriggle free. That evening I called Marcus Webb. I need to meet with you tomorrow, I said, and bring Catherine Morgan. It's time to prepare the final documents. Webb's office was on the 4th floor of a glass tower on East Camelback Road. I arrived at 10 in the morning, the envelope from Hawkins tucked under my arm. Catherine Morgan was already there, sitting in a leather chair with a legal pad in her lap. Webb greeted me with a firm handshake. "Mr. Coleman, you said you had new information." I spread the documents across his conference table. Webb and Morgan leaned in, their expressions shifting from professional interest to barely concealed shock. "These are forged?" Webb asked, holding up one of the checks. "Confirmed by a handwriting expert. Hawkins has the full analysis." Morgan picked up the emails about the house sale. Her face tightened. He was representing himself as having power of attorney. That's fraud, on top of the forgery. "What are my options?" I asked. Webb sat back, steepling his fingers. "You have several. First, we can file a criminal complaint with the Scottsdale Police Department. Forgery in Arizona is a Class 4 felony. 7 counts, that's potentially up to 26 years, if sentences run consecutively. Though realistically, he'd be looking at 3 to 5 years with a good lawyer. What else? Civil suit for the stolen funds. $173,000 plus damages. We could also pursue fraud charges related to the fake power of attorney claims." Catherine Morgan spoke up. "There's also the matter of your property. If he's been negotiating to sell your house without authorization, we should file a lis pendens immediately. That's a notice of pending litigation that prevents any transfer of the property." "Do it," I said. "And finally," Webb continued, "there's the eviction. Arizona law allows for a 30-day notice to vacate for at-will tenants. Given the circumstances, we could also pursue an expedited removal if we can demonstrate that he poses a threat to your property or person." I considered the options. Prison would be satisfying, but it would also mean years of court appearances, testimonies, the whole ugly process dragged out in public, and Rachel would be caught in the middle. "I want the criminal complaint prepared, but not filed," I said. "Hold it in reserve." Webb raised an eyebrow. "May I ask why?" "Because I want to give Jason a choice. He can leave quietly, sign over any claims to my estate, and disappear from my life forever. Or he can fight, and I'll file everything. The forgeries, the fraud, all of it." Morgan nodded slowly. "You're offering him a way out." "I'm offering him a chance to avoid prison. Whether he's smart enough to take it remains to be seen." We spent the next 3 hours preparing documents. A formal eviction notice, a civil complaint for fraud and theft, the criminal complaint, ready to file at a moment's notice. Catherine Morgan notarized everything, her stamps and signatures, turning paper into weapons. "The eviction notice gives them 30 days, Webb explained. "If they don't vacate, we file for forcible detainer. The court process takes another 2 to 3 weeks, but given the circumstances, I expect a judge would rule in your favor quickly." "And if Jason tries to contest the trust again while all this is happening?" Webb allowed himself a thin smile. "Then we file the criminal complaint. Once he's facing felony charges, his credibility as a litigant drops to 0. No judge will take seriously a trust contest from a man under indictment for forging the truster's signature." By the time we finished, the afternoon sun was slanting through Webb's windows, casting long shadows across the conference table. "One more thing," I said. "I want to know about Jason's family. His father, specifically." Webb consulted his notes. "Vernon Prescott owns a chain of car dealerships across Arizona and Nevada. Estimated net worth around $40 million. From what I understand, the relationship with Jason is strained. Can you get me his contact information?" "I can. May I ask what you're planning?" I gathered up the documents, sliding them back into the envelope. "Jason thinks he's fighting me alone. I want him to understand that the walls are closing in from every direction." That evening I sat in my study with a glass of water and watched the sunset paint the desert mountains in shades of orange and purple. The documents were locked in my safe now, waiting for the right moment. Jason was in the living room, laughing at something on television. I could hear Rachel moving around in the kitchen, the sounds of dinner being prepared. A normal evening in what appeared to be a normal home. They had no idea what was coming. I thought about the man Jason had been when Rachel first brought him home. Charming, confident, full of promises. I'd wanted to believe in him, wanted to believe my daughter had found happiness. Instead, she'd found a parasite, a man who saw my life's work as nothing more than a resource to be exploited. Tomorrow, I would begin the process of cutting him out. The eviction notice would be the first blow. The criminal evidence would be the hammer held over his head. And Vernon Prescott, Jason's own father, would be the final nail in the coffin. Jason thought that he was clever. He thought his schemes and manipulations made him superior. He was about to learn what happened when you tried to outsmart a man who'd spent his career designing structures meant to last for centuries. I picked up the phone and dialed the number Webb had given me. It rang 3 times before a gruff voice answered. Vernon Prescott. Mr. Prescott, my name is Harold Coleman. I believe we need to talk about your son. A long pause. Then, I was wondering when you'd call. Some foundations once laid could not be moved. Vernon Prescott suggested we meet at a steakhouse in North Scottsdale, far from anywhere Jason might see us. I arrived 10 minutes early and found him already waiting in a corner booth, nursing a glass of whiskey. He was a solid man in his mid-60s, with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life working hard. His handshake was firm, his eyes sharp, nothing like his son. Mr. Coleman, he said as I sat down, I appreciate you reaching out. You said you were wondering when I'd call. That suggests you know something about what's been happening. Vernon took a long drink of his whiskey. I know my son. I know he married your daughter. And I know that Jason has a way of making a mess wherever he goes. A waitress appeared, and I ordered coffee. Vernon waited until she left before continuing. What has he done this time? I opened the folder I'd brought and slid it across the table. Vernon put on reading glasses and began flipping through the documents. His expression grew darker with each page. Forgery, he muttered. Fraud. Attempting to sell property he doesn't own. He looked up at me. This is worse than I thought. Your son planned to have me declared incompetent so he could steal my assets. When that failed, he tried to intimidate me into submission. When that failed, he hired lawyers to contest my estate planning. And through it all, he's been forging my signature to steal money, directly. Vernon set down the documents. His face had gone pale, but there was something else there, too. Shame. How much did he take? $173,000 that I've documented, possibly more. And the house sale negotiations? He was offering my property for $700,000 under market value, just to get quick cash. He told the buyers he had power of attorney. Vernon closed his eyes for a moment. When he opened them, they were hard. My son has been a disappointment to me for a long time, Mr. Coleman. I built my business from nothing, worked 18-hour days for 20 years. I thought if I gave Jason opportunities, he'd learn the value of hard work. Instead, he learned that someone would always bail him out. I'm not here to discuss his upbringing. No, I expect you're here to tell me what you want. I sipped my coffee. I want your son out of my house and out of my life. I have enough evidence to send him to prison, but I'd prefer to avoid that. Rachel would be devastated, and despite everything, she's still my daughter. So what are you proposing? I'm going to serve Jason with an eviction notice, 30 days to vacate. I'm also going to show him the evidence of his crimes and give him a choice. Leave quietly and never contact me again, or face criminal charges. Vernon nodded slowly. And where do I come in? I want you to reinforce the message. Jason needs to understand that there's no cavalry coming, no one to bail him out this time. If he fights me, he loses everything, including whatever he might have hoped to inherit from you. The older man was silent for a long moment. He stared at the documents on the table, at the evidence of his son's crimes laid out in black and white. When he finally spoke, his voice was heavy with exhaustion. You know, when Jason was 12, he stole money from my wallet, $20. When I confronted him, he lied to my face, said he'd found it on the ground. I knew he was lying, but I let it go, told myself it was just a phase. He shook his head. That was my mistake. Every time he lied, every time he cheated, every time he took the easy way out, I made excuses. Boys will be boys. He'll grow out of it. He just needs another chance. And he never did. No, he just got better at hiding it. Vernon pushed the documents back toward me. $340,000? That's what he owes those investors? Yes, I'll pay it. Not to help Jason, but to protect those people he defrauded. They shouldn't suffer because my son is a criminal. That's your choice, but it doesn't change anything between Jason and me. I understand. Vernon pulled out his phone and typed something. I'm texting Jason right now, telling him I need to speak with him tomorrow, in person, at my office. What will you say? Vernon's jaw tightened. I'm going to tell him the truth, that I know what he's done, that I'm ashamed of him, and that if he doesn't leave your house peacefully and accept the consequences of his actions, I'll cut him off completely. No inheritance, no family support, nothing. He looked at me with eyes that held decades of disappointment. Mr. Coleman, I'm sorry for what my son has put you through. I raised him wrong, gave him too much, expected too little, but that ends now. We shook hands across the table. Vernon's grip was firm, resolute. One more thing, he said as I stood to leave. My son is dangerous when he's cornered. He'll try anything to wriggle out of this. Don't underestimate him. I won't. As I drove home through the darkening desert, I thought about Vernon's warning. Jason had already proven himself capable of forgery, fraud, and manipulation. What else might he do when his back was against the wall? But I'd planned for that, too. Every document was backed up in 3 locations. Webb had copies. Hawkins had copies. Even if Jason somehow destroyed everything in my house, the evidence would survive. The next phase would begin tomorrow. I waited until the following evening to deliver the eviction notice. I wanted to give Vernon time to speak with Jason first, to let the first cracks appear before I struck. Jason came home around 6, earlier than usual. I could tell immediately that something had happened. His usual swagger was gone, replaced by a tight-jawed tension. Rachel trailed behind him, her eyes red. They went straight to the kitchen. I heard the clink of a bottle, the splash of liquid, then raised voices. Your father had no right to say those things to me. Jason hissed. He said you've been lying to me. About money. About everything. Rachel's voice was shaking. He's exaggerating. You know how he is. Never believed in me. Never supported. Jason, he showed me bank statements. Transfers I never authorized. Debts I didn't know about. That's all a misunderstanding. I can explain. I walked into the kitchen carrying the manila envelope. They both froze when they saw me. Jason's face went from pale to flushed in an instant. What do you want, old man? I set the envelope on the counter. This is a formal notice to vacate. You have 30 days to leave my property. Jason laughed, but there was no humor in it. You can't kick us out. Rachel is your daughter. This is her home, too. Rachel is welcome to stay if she chooses. You are not. I'll sue you. I'll take you to court, and you can try. I pulled a second folder from behind my back. But first, you should look at these. I spread the documents across the kitchen island. Copies of the forged checks, the emails to Sedona Developments, the handwriting analysis, the draft conservatorship petition with its lies about my mental state. Jason stared at the papers. His face went through a remarkable transformation. Confusion, recognition, fear, and finally rage. Where did you get these? Does it matter? The point is I have them. 7 counts of forgery, attempted fraud, misrepresentation. Each forgery is a Class 4 felony in Arizona. Do the math, Jason. You're looking at years in prison. You wouldn't. Rachel would never forgive you. I looked at my daughter. She was staring at the documents, her face ashen. Dad, she whispered, picking up one of the forged checks. Is this your signature? No, it isn't. Your husband forged it. Rachel turned to Jason. Tell me this isn't true. Tell me you didn't do this. Jason's mouth opened and closed. For once, he had no smooth explanation, no charming deflection. Rachel, I can explain. I was going to pay it back. I just needed... You forged my father's signature. Her voice rose. You stole from him. It's not stealing. It's $173,000, I said. That's how much he took. Plus the credit card debt in your name. Plus what he owes investors. Over $400,000, Rachel. She backed away from Jason like he was a stranger. You told me we were fine. You told me the business was just going through a rough patch. You told me... She couldn't finish. Rachel, please. Jason reached for her arm. She pulled away. Don't touch me. The kitchen fell silent except for the refrigerator's hum. Jason's face had gone from rage to panic. He'd always talked his way out of trouble. But there was no talking out of this. Here's what's going to happen, I said, keeping my voice level. You're going to sign a document releasing any claims to my estate. You're going to leave this house within 30 days, and you're never going to contact me again. And if I don't? I gathered up the documents. Then these go to the Scottsdale police tomorrow. Your choice. Jason's hands were trembling. Whether from rage or fear, I couldn't tell. Maybe both. "You think you've won," he said through clenched teeth. "But this isn't over." "Actually, it is." I turned to Rachel. "I'm sorry you had to find out this way. Whatever you decide to do, you'll always have a place in my life, but not with him." I walked out of the kitchen and up to my room. Behind me, I could hear Rachel crying and Jason making excuses that sounded hollow, even to him. For the first time in months, I slept soundly. But the night wasn't over. Around 2 in the morning, I woke to movement downstairs. Quiet footsteps. The creak of a door. I got up and walked to the window. Jason's car was still in the driveway. I opened my door and listened. The sounds were coming from my study. I made my way down the hall quietly. As I approached the study, I could see a faint light, the glow of a phone screen. Jason was at my desk, going through drawers. "The safe is behind the Remington print," I said from the doorway, "but you won't get in. The combination isn't written down anywhere." Jason spun around, his face ghostly in the phone's light. I was just... "You were looking for the documents, hoping to destroy the evidence." He straightened up, dropping any pretense. "You can't blame me for trying." "Actually, I can, but it doesn't matter. Those papers you saw tonight, they're copies. The originals are with my lawyer, and my private investigator, and in a safety deposit box at First Arizona Trust." Jason's face went through several emotions. Denial, calculation, despair. "You really thought of everything, didn't you?" "I designed structures that need to withstand earthquakes, floods, time itself. Did you really think I wouldn't plan for every contingency?" He slumped against the desk. In the dim light, he looked smaller somehow, less like the predator who'd tried to steal my life, and more like a frightened child. "What am I supposed to do now?" he asked. And for once there was no manipulation in his voice, just exhaustion. "You have 30 days. I suggest you use them wisely." I went back to my room and locked the door. Through the window, I watched the first hints of dawn color the eastern sky. Jason would leave, one way or another, and then I could begin rebuilding. 3 weeks passed, 23 days of watching Jason spiral. At first, he tried to maintain his usual composure, still walking around the house like he owned it, still smiling that plastic smile. But the cracks were showing. He was on his phone constantly, having whispered arguments with someone, probably his lawyer. Rachel had moved into one of the guest bedrooms, and they barely spoke. 1 week before the eviction deadline, everything came to a head. It was late, past 11, when I heard a soft knock on my door. I opened it to find Rachel standing in the hallway, her face tear-streaked, her eyes red. "Dad," she whispered, "can we talk?" I stepped aside and let her in. She sat on the edge of the armchair by the window, looking smaller than I'd seen her in years. "I'm so sorry," she said, her voice breaking. "For everything. For not seeing what he was. For choosing him over you. For all of it." I sat across from her, saying nothing, waiting. "I found more," she continued, "on his computer. Emails I wasn't supposed to see. He was planning to leave the country once he got control of your money. Take everything and disappear. Without me." "I know," I said quietly. "My investigator found the same thing." Rachel's face crumpled. "You knew? And you still gave me a chance to stay?" "You're my daughter. That never changed, even when you couldn't see the truth." She started crying in earnest then. Not the polite tears she used to produce when Jason wanted sympathy, but real, raw sobs that shook her whole body. "I filed for divorce," she said when she could speak again. "I talked to a lawyer yesterday. Jason doesn't know yet." "How did he react when you told him about the evidence you found?" "I haven't told him. I'm afraid of what he'll do." We sat in silence for a moment. Outside, the desert night was clear and cold. "I love you, Rachel," I said finally. "I always have. But love doesn't mean I can protect you from the consequences of your choices. You chose to believe Jason over me. You chose to help him isolate me in my own home. Those choices had consequences." "I know," she whispered. "That said, you're still my daughter. If you want to rebuild our relationship, the door's open, but it will take time, and it will happen on my terms, not yours." She nodded, wiping her eyes. "I understand. Thank you, Dad. I don't deserve your patience, but I'm grateful for it. Deserving has nothing to do with it. You're family. Real family, not the parasitic version Jason tried to create. She almost smiled at that, the first hint of her old self I'd seen in years. After she left, I sat by the window for a long time, thinking. The old Rachel was still in there, buried under years of manipulation. Maybe, with time, we could find our way back to each other. The thought brought a warmth I hadn't felt in months. The next morning, Rachel told Jason about the divorce. I was in my study when the screaming started. Jason's voice, high and frantic. Rachel's, steady but firm. The crash of something breaking. I walked to the top of the stairs and watched. Jason was in the living room, his face contorted with rage. Rachel stood near the front door, a suitcase at her feet. "You can't do this to me," Jason shouted, "after everything I've done for you." "Everything you've done?" Rachel's voice was incredulous. "You stole from my father. You forged his signature. You were going to abandon me and disappear with his money. What exactly have you done for me?" "That's not... You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." She picked up her suitcase. "I'm staying at a hotel until I can find an apartment. My lawyer will be in contact about the divorce proceedings." "Rachel, please. We can work this out. I love you." She paused at the door. "No, Jason. You don't love anyone but yourself. I just took too long to see it." The door closed behind her. Jason stood frozen for a moment. Then his gaze slowly rose to where I stood on the landing. "This is your fault," he hissed. "You turned her against me." "No, Jason, you did that yourself. I just showed her the evidence." His hands clenched into fists. For a moment I thought he might charge up the stairs. "You have 6 days," I said calmly. "I suggest you start packing." That afternoon, Jason's phone rang. I was close enough to hear Vernon Prescott's voice on the other end, sharp and cold. "Listen carefully," Vernon said. "I'm not going to bail you out of this. I paid off your investors because they didn't deserve to suffer for your crimes. But that's it. If you don't leave Harold's house peacefully and accept the consequences of your actions, I will publicly disown you. I'll issue a statement to every newspaper in Arizona, and I will change my will to leave you nothing, not a single penny." Jason's face went white. "Dad, you can't." "I can, and I will. You've embarrassed this family for the last time. Make your choice." The call ended. Jason stood there, phone in hand, looking like a man who just watched his last lifeboat sail away. The final day arrived quietly. A Tuesday morning, crisp and bright. Jason had spent the last week in a fog, packing his things in silence. No more threats, no more schemes. Whatever fire had driven him seemed to have burned out, leaving only ash. I stood on the front porch, watching him load boxes into his car. A rented sedan, nothing like the luxury vehicle he'd driven when he first married Rachel. The Rolex was gone from his wrist, sold to pay some fraction of his debts. He made trip after trip, his face blank, his movements mechanical. When the last box was loaded, he stood by the car, looking at the house he'd tried to steal. "Well," he said finally, "I guess this is it." I walked down the porch steps and stopped a few feet away from him. "Before you go," I said, "I want to tell you something." Jason's jaw tightened. "More lectures about my failures?" "No, just an observation." I looked at the house behind me, the home I'd built with decades of work. "You know what the funniest part of all this is?" He didn't answer. "If you had just treated me with basic respect, none of this would have happened. You could have lived here for years, building a real relationship with Rachel and me. And when I eventually passed, you would have inherited everything. The house, the investments, all $90 million. Jason's face flickered with something, maybe regret, maybe just frustration at a missed opportunity. "But you couldn't do that," I continued. "You couldn't treat an old man with dignity. You had to scheme and manipulate and steal. You had to try to have me declared incompetent. You had to demand that I crawl on my knees and beg for your forgiveness." I stepped closer, close enough to see the defeat in his eyes. "You chose to crawl metaphorically your whole life, Jason, taking shortcuts, lying and cheating your way forward, never standing up straight and doing the hard work of being a decent person. And now look where it's gotten you." He said nothing. What could he say? "Goodbye, Jason. Don't contact me again. Don't contact Rachel. If I ever see you on my property, I'll file those criminal charges so fast you'll be in handcuffs before you reach the driveway." He got in his car without another word. The engine started, and then he was gone, turning onto Mockingbird Lane and disappearing around the corner. I stood there for a long moment, feeling the Arizona sun on my face, the weight I'd been carrying for months, the constant vigilance, the strategic planning. It all slowly began to lift. For the first time since that dinner party when Jason called me a museum piece, I felt truly free. Webb called that afternoon to confirm that Jason had signed all the necessary documents: release of claims, agreement not to contest the trust, acknowledgement of debts. Everything was legally airtight. "It's over, Mr. Coleman," Webb said. "You won." "It doesn't feel like winning," I admitted. "It feels like surviving." Sometimes that's the same thing. And for what it's worth, I've handled dozens of cases like this. Most don't end this well. You played it perfectly. I had good advisors. You had good instincts. That's what made the difference. A month later, I received a letter, handwritten, on plain white paper. The postmark was from a Phoenix address I didn't recognize. "Dear Dad," it began, "I know I don't deserve your forgiveness. I know I failed you in ways I can never fully make up for. But I'm trying to become a better person. The divorce is finalized. I've started seeing a therapist. I'm working part-time at a bookshop while I figure out what to do with my life. I know you said rebuilding our relationship will take time and happen on your terms. I accept that. But when you're ready, I would love to see you. Maybe coffee somewhere, just to talk. No pressure, no expectations. I love you, Dad. I always have, even when I couldn't show it. Rachel." I read the letter 3 times. Then I sat down at my desk and pulled out a sheet of paper. "Dear Rachel," I wrote, "Saturday, 2 o'clock, Desert Bloom Cafe. I'll buy the coffee." That evening I walked through my house, room by room. The study where I'd caught Jason searching for documents. The kitchen where Rachel had finally seen the truth. The living room where Jason had dropped to his knees when he learned he'd lost everything. My home, mine again. I ended up in my workshop, where my collection of antique clocks lined the shelves. I picked up the one I'd been restoring for months, a 19th century carriage clock with a broken escapement. The repair work was delicate, requiring patience and precision, but when it was done, the clock would run perfectly again, keeping time for another 100 years. Some things, once broken, could be fixed. It just took patience and the right tools. I wound the clock and listened to it tick, steady, reliable, like a heartbeat. Through the window, I could see the desert mountains turning gold in the evening light, the same view I'd enjoyed for decades, the same home. But somehow it all looked different now, cleaner, clearer. Life goes on, and sometimes justice is served. If you like this story, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, and share your impressions of this story in the comments. To listen to the next story, click on the box on the left. Thank you for watching.